All right, today we're going to really sharpen our strategic toolkit. We're diving deep into something called the CAGE framework. And why should you care? Well, because if you're still just looking at miles on a map to figure out global business, you're missing the whole picture. Let's get into it.
So, why do so many global strategies just fail? You've seen it, right? A company has this awesome product, a bulletproof plan, they launch into a new country, and bam, they hit this invisible wall. What's going on? Well, it happens over and over, and the answer, it turns out, is usually hiding in plain sight.
And here's the big reveal. The reason isn't on any map. It's all about distance. But wait, not the kind of distance you measure in miles or kilometers. We're talking about the unseen friction between countries. You know, those gaps in culture, the different rules, the economic realities. And here's the bottom line. If you can't see this distance, there is no way you can manage it.
Okay, so how on earth do we make this invisible distance visible? Well, that's exactly where the CAG framework comes in. I want you to think of it like a new set of lenses for your glasses. 4 of them, actually. Cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic. Each one helps us see the real hidden challenges of taking a business global.
Let's start with the C, cultural distance. Now, this goes way beyond just language or different holidays. We're talking about the deep, unwritten rules of how a society works. Take China, for example. The idea of guanxi, that's the personal trust network, is everything in business. If a Western company comes in thinking a contract is all they need, without building those personal relationships, they're going to have a really tough time. It's all about understanding how trust is really built in that specific place. Next up, we've got A for administrative distance. This is all about the formal stuff. Governments, laws, politics. You have to ask, are the legal systems even compatible? Is there bad blood between the countries politically? In emerging markets, this factor is just massive. It can mean everything from dealing with corruption to courts you can't rely on, to the very real risk that someone's going to steal your intellectual property and there's nothing you can do about it. And you know what? For most companies trying to break into these complex markets, this is usually the biggest hurdle. It's what the experts call institutional voids. It's a fancy term, but all it really means are these huge gaps in the formal rules of the game. And those gaps, they create a ton of uncertainty and risk for anyone who's not a local. All right, on to G for geographic distance. Now, this one seems pretty obvious, right? How far away is it? But hold on, it's about so much more than just miles. Think about infrastructure. A country right next door might only be 100 miles away on a map, but if the roads are a mess and the ports are slow, that short trip can cause more headaches and cost you more money than shipping something halfway across the globe to a place that has its act together. And finally, we have E for economic distance. This is basically the wealth gap. You know, big differences in what people earn, the cost of labor, that kind of thing. But here's where it gets really interesting. Unlike the other 3 distances, which are pretty much always problems to solve, a big economic distance can actually be the main reason you go there. Companies often expand to emerging markets to take advantage of that gap. It's a strategy called arbitrage, and it's why you see so many companies chasing things like cheaper labor. So there you have it, our 4 lenses, C, A, G, and E. But here's a really common trap people fall into. Just listing the facts for each one is not a strategy, not even close. The real magic, the real power, comes from using these lenses to make a sharp diagnosis. So let's walk through exactly how you turn this framework from a simple list into a killer analytical tool. It's actually a pretty focused 3-step process. First, you set up your comparison. Home country versus host country. Simple enough. Second, and this part is absolutely crucial, you don't treat all 4 distances the same. You have to figure out which one is the single biggest roadblock, what we call the dominant constraint. And then third, you have to link that specific problem directly to what the company is actually doing, to its strategy. Okay, let's make this real with an example. Picture an education company from Singapore. They're looking to expand into Vietnam. Now, if you just glance at it, geographically, they're super close. Culturally, there's some overlap. And economically, Vietnam is a hot, growing market. But when you apply the CAGE lenses, one problem stands out above all the rest: administrative distance. Specifically, trying to navigate Vietnam's incredibly complex and frankly confusing licensing laws for foreign companies in the education world. All right, pay attention, because this next bit is where we separate the good from the great. It's what makes the difference between a pass grade and a high distinction. See, just knowing the CAGE factors, that's one thing. But using them to build a really sharp, insightful argument, that is a whole other level.
Let's look at the difference between a basic analysis and a real strategic one.
So, on one side, you've got the pass approach. It's just listing facts. The legal systems are different. Vietnam is a poorer country. It's fine, it's descriptive, but it never answers the big question, so what? Now look at the other side, the high distinction approach. This isn't a list, it's a diagnosis. It zeroes in on administrative distance as the critical problem, the so-called liability of foreignness. And then, here's the key, it explains how the company's strategy, in this case a joint venture, was picked for the specific purpose of solving that one big problem.
And that right there is the core insight. The strategy wasn't just pulled out of a hat. The Singaporean firm decided on a joint venture because they knew they needed a local partner. And why did they need them? To leverage that partner's connections, their know-how, basically their political capital, to get through that messy, unclear licensing process. The strategy becomes a direct solution to the cage problem. That's what powerful analysis looks like.
Okay, let's boil this all down into a final checklist. This is something you can use anytime you're looking at a global strategy. This is really the big payoff.
It all comes down to this simple three-part method. First, you select. You pick the one or two cage factors that matter the most. You have to ignore the noise to stay focused. Second, you diagnose. You use those factors to explain the specific risks in that market. And third, you prescribe. You explain exactly how the company's strategy is designed to lower those specific risks. Select, diagnose, prescribe. That's the formula. Look, the most important thing to take away is that the cage framework is so much more than just some academic model. It's a real, practical tool. It lets you see the world differently, to spot those invisible forces that make or break a global business. So now that you have this tool, the only question left is, what hidden friction are you going to uncover next?